This is a devlog about my dream game, inspired by Zelda Breath of the Wild, and... okay, just kidding. Let's start again. Hello, you can call me Tailson. I have been developing games for fun since I was a child. But in the end of last year, I have finished 2 games in Roblox. A horror game inspired by It Stills.
Let me cook.
Alright, cook, bro. Cook.
Let me cook.
And a RP open world like GTA Online. These 2 projects had some considerable amount of financial success, and they gave me a lot of confidence to finally, after 10 years of making games, sit down and develop a game with the purpose of releasing it. Of course, I will be going back to Unity because I'm way more familiar with, and I find the marketing and development process way more healthier than the Roblox platform. The 50 viewers of my channel already know that I made some devlogs about a space game that I was developing. This game is my main goal and my dream project, and to achieve this vision with this full potential, I noticed that I would need a considerable amount of money and work with this project full time, and I don't have any of these requirements yet. So, my plan is to release a game with a smaller scope that I can manage developing alone and create a healthy community around my devlogs and my game. Then, in the future, I will resume my main space game project. I started developing this new game 2 months ago and I recorded a lot of progress through the weeks. So I will show how I work with my projects, from the creative process to the modeling and programming. First and most important for me is to collect a lot of references with ideas for the game. I created concepts for the gameplay of the game, environment, mechanics and story. After that, I developed for 2 weeks at max a fast prototype to see if my idea is fun and works. To help me, I have a board to throw all the random ideas I have during the day. This board have annotations and images from all things that I find interesting. So when I start a new game, I visit here to collect things that will work together with my game idea. I started the development of this game collecting a lot of references from this board. With this, I ended up with a game concept that would be exploration driven, where the player would descend into an abyss with the object of going to the bottom. Gameplay wise, the game would be a multiplayer roguelike, with the abyss changing after every run. I used the 2 weeks to create basic models, movements, animations, graphics, and so on. Since I made a lot of prototypes in the last years, I find dynamic and fast to develop small ideas like this. At the end, I was really satisfied with the story of the game, but the prototype itself wasn't satisfying me. I had a feeling that the roguelike idea, modular abyss generation and multiplayer system that I was thinking about were increasing the complexity of the project too much and were not working as I envisioned it. I felt that the game wasn't going to the correct direction. Ideally, a more consistent and serious developer would change this prototype to fit in a development schedule, removing systems and changing the planes to create something more achievable. But this approach doesn't work for me. I find it boring and stressful to continue working on a project that I'm not really passionate about. And this game idea wasn't holding my attention. So I threw everything in the trash and started all over again. I consider games more like a form of art than a form of entertainment, as said by the master Fumito Ueda himself. Of course, we can all enjoy some funny multiplayer game night with our friends, and that's the magic of video games. They can be lyric, but also immersive and inspirational. So I noticed that a lot of ideas of my generic multiplayer game were holding back my interesting ideas that I wasn't taking a serious approach yet. So after starting again, I poured all my ideas into this project. My new project idea focused heavily on environment storytelling and immersion. In this game, the character that the player will control is a lost soul, a being that has died and arrived at a place where all things end. The problem is that this place is long forgotten by its god and things didn't hold together. So the player will arrive at a forgotten place with the object to understand where he is and what he needs to do. The game will focus more on a contemplative approach to the gameplay, almost like a meditative experience where you explore a strange world and talk with different people that are in the same boat as your character. I will leave the world building and lore topics to the end of the video. For now, I will show how was my progress developing the foundations of the game. The first thing I started creating was the placeholder character. After modeling and rigging, I used the character model to create the movement system. I used a system called Finite Player State Machine. With this approach, I can implement how many players' states I want, without increasing the complexity of my code. Some example states are jump, swim, fall, and so on. While I made this, I also had the idea to slightly tilt the character model when changing the movement direction. This gave a lot more personality to the movement. After I had the character, the next thing I worked on was the main mechanic of the game, the items. In this game, I want the items and the inventory to have a great influence on the gameplay. Like the From Software games, many items will have descriptions with hints of the lore and useful tips. Also, many items will be equipable. The player will have 4 inventory slots to equip items. Each one of these slots corresponds to a key or a button of the input. For example, in a gamepad, each of these slots can be activated by pressing these buttons. The main aspect of this system is that the character starts the game only knowing how to move. He doesn't know any other mechanic, not even jumping. However, when the player finds and equips an item, let's say jumping boots, the character will be able to jump when the item slot is activated. With this system, the player will constantly find items that change entirely the gameplay and mechanics of the game. For example, at the start of the game, the player can see an entrance in a hill that can only be accessible through jumping or flying. However, in the future, when the player finds some item that gives the ability to fly, he can backtrack and access that area. I want the world of the game to have a lot of experiences like this, where the player can choose how to approach a certain objective and make unique combinations with the items. After developing this mechanic, I was missing a lot of interface, so I used some days to create multiple screens for the game, including the inventory, equipment, and so on. The next step was to implement another huge feature of the game, the NPCs. I aimed to make them work similarly to the ones in From Software games too. However, I want to make them less enigmatic and not move randomly through the map. Basically, they will exchange monologues with the character and often give or receive items. To easily implement dialogues, I created a system with 2 steps. The first one is to select the ID of the dialogue. I will explain this ID in a minute. And other important triggers for the NPC. For example, I can make the NPC request an item to progress through his dialogue and continue his quest line. Or I can also check this to make the player need to go far away from the NPC to make him teleport to a new location. Now, as explained, every NPC can have an ID. The items also have IDs, and save points of the game will also have IDs. In the future, I want the game to be localized in more languages than English. And I am already thinking of the architecture of my project to make this translation easier. To achieve this, I created one big JSON file that will contain all the text of the game. When the game needs some text, the system will read this file and find the specific ID to get the text of the game. The next step was to implement the save system, so I also used one JSON file to save and load important data such as current progress of the NPC dialogue, character inventory, and so on. Also, I encrypted the file to avoid players changing the game data. At last, the feature I started to work on was the audio. I like every step of game development, but audio design for me is one of my favorites. For the first time, I chose to work with Fmod, an audio engine that has a slightly difficult learning curve, but increases a lot of the quality in the process of creating new audios for the game. One of the few audios that I added with Fmod was the character footsteps. Basically, an event is triggered when a certain part of the movement animation plays, and Fmod plays a random footstep song based on the terrain that the player is on. I also added the reverb zones that can change the sound of objects around the scene. At the end of the first month of development, I had a solid foundation of my game and I could easily add new items, NPCs, and mechanics. But before doing anything, I would need to design the open world. So I stayed a few days drawing and thinking about the map of the game. I opted to work with Unity terrain and sculpt the base shape of the terrain. In the future, I will explain more about the structure I designed for this map. I want the game to always express the huge architecture of these lands, so a big map was needed, but one great effect that enhances a lot of the depth perception and helps in the immersion of the setting was missing: fog. I could just enable Unity Engine fog and settle for the day, but this does not achieve the vision I have for the environment. So I researched a lot of options and systems that could use, and I decided to use this volumetric fog. After some time tweaking the settings and learning how to use the fog, things went from this to this. Talking a bit about the lore of the game, this lands will take place in the Sea of Fog. So I think it's fitting to increase the volume of the fog and clouds around this place. Performance-wise, it is efficient and doesn't take a lot of frame rates. So I still will work in the future with this fog. It's far from done, but for now I have a good placeholder to kind of feel what direction I want the game to take. One last mechanic that I needed to implement was a locomotion system, since the map is huge. Visual wise, I do not know what I will do yet, but mechanically speaking, this is literally a hoverboard where the player can slide through the terrain and have fun while moving. To create this mechanic, I basically placed 4 points of force in the object, the hoverboard. The closer to the ground, the more force it will apply to that point. Like I said, I do not want this to look like a hoverboard, and I'm still thinking what this will look like in the future when the visual is finished. After working the basic shapes of the terrain, I was thinking what I could do to remove the classic Unity terrain feel of this view and give more detail to the game. After doing some quick field research in Elden Ring, I found that most games use a lot of rocks to create interesting shapes and cliffs. I tried this approach and rapidly I noticed that this would work. So I kept placing rocks and I placed like a lot of rocks. I placed rocks for days and this is not exaggeration. While I'm recording this video, I'm still halfway through the map. I could easily use some painting tool to place some rocks, but I do not like the result. I choose to use a more manual approach to have a more controlled vision for the terrain, to create a more natural experience for the player. Now, I would like to use the end of this video to talk more about the lore of the game and how I approach world building. I played and still play a lot of tabletop RPGs, and I always the dungeon master, so I developed the ability to create the lore for the words and characters with the time. I have years of inspirations attached to a single place where I can go there and create new stories. For this game, I have two main inspirations that will guide me to create the visuals and feelings I want to evoke in the player. The first of them is the painter Caspar David Friedrich. In Caspar's paintings, the research of the sublime and the depiction of nature as a mysterious and wonderful sight are always a point of discussion. These paintings were always referenced in multiple medias and used as inspiration for some well-known games. Here, in my project, I want to enforce the ideas that Caspar had expressed through his work. The other inspiration is Fumito Ueda's games, mainly Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus is one of the most praised games of all time and my personal favorite. In the past decade, a lot of developers tried to recreate the unique feeling of that game. These games were good for the merit, but didn't quite hit the spot where Shadow of the Colossus has achieved. Most developers think that what makes Shadow of the Colossus unique is the Colossus. And that's true. But another main aspect is the solitude and immersion of Fumito Ueda's games. So here, with this project, I'm trying to achieve the sublime that Caspar's paintings had, and the solitude that Fumito Ueda shows in his projects. When I start the development of a prototype or a game, I like to consume diverse forms of media to help me in my creative process. And last month was a really good time to do this, because I saw two good things: The Boy and the Heron and Dune Part 2. These stories really stuck with me and helped me a lot to think about what meaningful stories I could craft for my game. I would like to talk a little more about the last Miyazaki movie, The Boy and the Heron. I drew a lot of inspirations from what I think is one of the best works of Studio Ghibli. The contemplation of the environment and the story told just by the scenes without the need of dialogue is something that really leaves me flabbergasted. Miyazaki showed in this movie all the wonders of the imagination while telling a deep story about what the end is. Another message that I saw from this movie is that Miyazaki is passing the torch for the next generation. I'm sure that he doesn't know much about games as a form of art, but I strongly believe that this is a way to tell stories too, and I'm excited to see what developers will make in the future. I hope we can create wonderful things as Miyazaki too, now that the torch has passed to our generation. Well, this is the end of the first devlog for my game. This will be a long journey, so I hope to see you until the end. And until next video, bye.